Hello, hello, testing, testing.
Good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's administrative meeting for January 18th, 2023, Inauguration Day. Noon today we'll have a new governor in the State House, although the work of this agency will continue uninterrupted. We do have meeting minutes to approve from our last meeting of January 11th, 2023. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The meeting minutes are approved. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. There are 5 items on today's consent agenda. Item number 1 is a request from Gotham Energy 360 LLC to cancel its electricity and gas supplier licenses. Item number 2 is a notice of material change from Telco Pros, Inc. Item number 3 is a notice of change in ownership of various renewable energy facilities from Sequitur Renewables, LLC. Item number 4 is a joint application from Armstrong Telephone Company and Bartel USA, Inc. for approval of an interconnection agreement. And finally, item number 5 is a notice of name change from Magna 5 LLC and Ring Squared Telecom LLC.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the commissioners, I would move with respect to item number 1 that we approve the cancellation request for Gotham Energy 360 LLC. With respect to item number 2, I move that we note the filing and name change. With respect to item number 3, I move that we note the filing. With respect to item number 4, I move that we approve the interconnection agreement 10 days after a 30-day comment period unless adverse comments are filed. And finally, with respect to item number 5, I move that we note the company's name change and direct the company to post its Maryland pricing guide to its website and file the link to said pricing guide with the commission within 30 days. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motions are approved.
Mr. Chairman, items number 6 and 7 on the administrative agenda consist of revised tariff pages proposing to true up standard offer services administrative charges.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Justy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Anson Justy on behalf of staff. On December 14th, 2022, Potomac Electric Power Company, PEPCO, filed revisions to its standard offer service rider to true up administrative charges for residential, Type 1, Type 2, and hourly standard offer service customers, or SOS. The administrative charge represents costs the company incurs to provide SOS service, including labor costs, capital costs, general costs, and a rate of return on capital assets. Actual administrative costs get trued up compared to estimates 3 times per year in February, June, and October. For residential customers in this instant filing, the administrative charge is decreasing by 6.6% to 1.85 mils per kilowatt hour, or 1.85 cents per 1,000 kilowatt hours used. Type 1 and Type 2 customers will see a 38.1% and 27% increase to 2.68 and 2.26 mils per kilowatt hour respectively, and hourly customers will see an 11.8% decrease to 1.72 mils per kilowatt hour. Staff recommends the Commission accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of February 1st, 2023.
Thank you, and thank your team as well. Counsel for the PHI Utilities.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Matthew Seegers appearing for PEPCO and Delmarva Power. The only item that we have to add to staff's presentation is concerning the DPL administrative charge. We did want to note for the Commission that there is one component of the administrative charge that is not reflected here, and that is the administrative adjustment. That portion is being set as part of it was set as part of the DPL MYP case. Those compliance tariff sheets will be before the Commission hopefully on February the 1st. So we just wanted to let the Commission know that all of the other components of the DPL administrative charge are correct, and those will be included as well as the administrative adjustment once that gets approved by the Commission. With that, we are available if you have any questions. I have with me Ms. Kaja Dana, our Senior Manager of Retail Rates, available as well.
Thank you for flagging that additional item, Mr. Seegers, and Ms. Dana, welcome. Do Commissioners have questions on items 6 or 7? Seeing none, I would move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of February 1st, 2023 for both items 6 and 7. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number 8 consists of revised tariff pages from Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc., proposing to add a Green Path rider.
And if we could have OPC who's filed comments approach. And we'll have counsel for Mr. Lapp. Why don't you have a seat at the table? Mr. Gallagher, you may approach the podium. Is there anybody else that wishes to comment on this proceeding? Yes, please. Agency heads are allowed to be comfortable.
Sometimes.
Right, the commission received the proposal from Columbia Gas back on September 16, 2022. The commissioners have read and reviewed the proposal. They've reviewed the buck sheet prepared by Dr. Coates of technical staff. They've reviewed comments filed by Office of People's Counsel. And we saw the response from NIPSCO, I believe, that was filed the other day. We'll begin with questions. Dr. Coates will save you from a recitation, a summary of your buck sheet, which was very thorough. Thank you. We'll begin the questioning with Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. And I would agree the buck sheet was extremely thorough. I just really, really enjoyed reading it. And actually, all of the filings were really helpful to read. So we'll start with a couple questions and just summarize from the buck sheet the concerns that were noted by the staff that, that maybe these offsets create incentives to defer GHG reductions in the state. And so that's somewhat of a concern. And that the program doesn't necessarily contribute to meeting Maryland's goals because of where the offsets may be coming from. And so I think that's an important point. I think that all of the recommendations provided by the staff in the buck sheet addressed a lot of the issues that were raised. So I actually found those to be compelling and kind of easy to agree with. But I do have some questions maybe for Columbia to start with. Can you talk a little bit about why this is necessary to do now? I think several of us went to Columbia back in the fall, and they talked to us a little bit about what you're doing with RNG in the company in terms of doing some research and maybe being able to offer that yourselves. But just wanted to understand why this is something important to do now, and also if you can talk about maybe any other activities that the company may be doing to address emissions, leaks and other emissions?
Thank you for the opportunity to address those issues. And if I could, I'd like to introduce Eric Evans, who is the Director of Strategy and Risk Integration for NiSource. I think he could, better than I could, articulate those response to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if all parties could please enter an appearance prior to speaking. Thank you.
Theodore Gallagher on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. Apologize. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. To answer your questions, why now is, we don't want to wait. I mean, we're trying to figure out what our customers would like to do and like to see around carbon reductions. This is a start for us. It'll help us gauge customer interest and what we can do. Hopefully we'll see large customer interest in carbon emissions reduction, and that would allow us then to invest in more, maybe more localized but more expensive programs, such as actual RNG production within the state, advanced energy efficiency, and things like that could really lower emissions. And then moving into hydrogen later, we see that as another piece of the puzzle. And as far as what the company's doing, NiSource as a whole, we're looking at all those things. We have a pilot looking at hydrogen in Pennsylvania to find out how we can blend hydrogen into our system. Hopefully that's successful and we can learn from it and figure out how we can blend hydrogen throughout our service territories, including Maryland. So that, and then also, like I said, advanced energy efficiency, renewable natural gas. We'd like to do more. We're trying to start what we can to kind of see what we can do without overburdening ratepayers with a lot of expense and something. So that's really kind of why we're doing it now and what else we're looking at.
Can you talk a little bit about the education that you would do of your customers in terms of kind of understanding what this really means in terms of greenhouse gas reductions where they live?
Sure. Yeah, and we're going to be upfront and explain that, we're buying RNG attributes, which we'll find out from our supplier where those are coming from, and we'll disclose that. Maybe they're Maryland, Pennsylvania, maybe in other states. We'll disclose where they're coming from and be very upfront that RNG is entering the gas system in another state. We're buying the attributes from that to show that they are being used or credited to Maryland at that point, or Maryland's customers. So we'll explain that process. Same thing on the carbon offsets. We'll explain where they're coming from and what that really means. That if they're not within the state, yeah, it's something happening in another area, and that's where the carbon's really being reduced. But the credit is going to the customers of Maryland. So we'll be up front, explain all that, and kind of work through the issue so customers understand it, and they can understand that if we're able to move forward with more RNG, carbon emission reductions in other areas, they'll understand how that will work as we expand this more globally.
Okay. I appreciate that you're in your filing yesterday that you agreed with the staff's recommendations. And so one of the recommendations was that there be an audit, an independent audit. So can you just talk a little bit about your perspective on the ability to be able to have an independent audit, and also what if that audit does show that maybe these offsets weren't exactly what we thought they were? How would that be handled?
Yeah, and I'll admit we don't know exactly how we'll do the audit at this point. We haven't found an auditing firm yet, but we know already from our supplier they'll provide us on a monthly basis where the carbon offsets are coming from, where the RNG is coming from, details of each of those projects. So we'll have that each month. If that audit would somehow show that they are not legitimate offsets, we would go back to the supplier because our contract with them demands that they provide us legitimate offsets that are truly permanent and real offsets. So we go back to them and seek some form of remediation from them. That's our intent, is to have legitimate offsets for this program.
Okay. I think I'll stop there. I may have other questions depending on my colleagues' questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Help me understand how the market for these attributes works in the gas side. Just kind of fill in the blanks for me a little bit. So there was some comparison by staff to REX for generation attributes, and that's controlled by PJM and its generation attributes system. How's it controlled in the gas side of the world?
Yeah, it's very similar to REX. I mean, there's no PJM or on the gas side of things, of course, but really it's all tracked through the MRET system.
What is that?
Which is I forget it's a market tracking system that's grown up to be able to track these. Because what happens, RNG will enter the system somewhere. Let's say there's an RNG project in Ohio. RNG is injected into the gas system, and there was a need because let's say that RNG producer is trying to sell their gas to another state. Let's say it is in Maryland. There was a need to track that to make sure that we're not double counting, that someone else isn't claiming they're getting the RNG also, and so forth, because the molecules just mix into the system and then go anywhere in the pipeline. So what grew out of that was this idea of how to track it, which is what the MRET system does. So each decatherm of RNG is tracked, so it can only be counted once, it can only be retired one time. And then that grew into, well, since we're doing that tracking.
Who controls that MRET system?
It's a third-party organization.
Are they regulated by anybody?
They are not, no.
Okay, continue, please.
So what that grew into is that, well, if we're tracking it, we can split the brown gas from the attributes. So the actual physical molecules of methane that's coming out of that RNG producer, we can split that from the environmental attributes and just trade those, since everyone acknowledges, once those molecules get into the gas system, you can't track where one molecule of methane goes. If it came from RNG or if it came from the ground, we don't know. So it's kind of split into just this idea of let's just track the attributes. And that's what it does, to make sure, like I said, whoever is paying for them can claim that they are getting it, it's retired in there just for them, and no one else can claim those attributes or the environmental pieces of that RNG.
I appreciate that. I do have some concern, Mr. Chairman, that this third-party entity, and I don't even know who they are or what they are, is not regulated by anybody or accountable to anybody, unlike PJM, who is regulated by the FERC and who we have regular contact with and are very familiar with. We have no idea who regulates, who controls these attributes and what their business model is, or who they're accountable to. Probably nobody. They're just operating a business. Let me ask you this. Who pays for the administration of this program, this Green Path Rider program?
The bulk of the administration is included in the price we're getting from our supplier. So there's a little bit of administration that's within Columbia, will be on the reporting side of things. And it's gathering on a monthly basis the volumes of customers who've signed up for this and providing that to the third party. The third party handles all the other administration, such as securing the assets, or the offsets, the RNG attributes, working with the carbon offset registries and MRATs and everything.
So setting up IT programs and doing administration and monitoring and all that sort of stuff, that's going to be part of your normal operations rate-based, right?
Well, there is some IT work that's being done, and our proposal is to take those costs and add it into that monthly charge, or that per decatherm charge to customers.
So what part do the ratepayers who don't opt into this opt-in program, what burden do they carry? OPC indicates that they're going to carry some burden, and I want you to tell me forthrightly, what part of this burden will the general ratepayers pay?
Nothing is what it is.
Nothing?
Nothing's what it should be. We agree with staff's recommendation that all those costs should be added into that charge. So instead of a $3 per decatherm charge, it'll be $3 plus the cost for the IT programming and the other internal administration costs added into that.
Would People's Council like to weigh in on this? It seems like, at least as I read it, you're asserting that ratepayers may have some burden here.
Yeah, David Lapp here on behalf of the People's Council, and I have Alice Napoleon, who is the expert that whose affidavit we attached to our filing, and I have Michael San Martino here as well to bail me out if there are questions that I can't answer. I would say that it's somewhat ambiguous as to what the company is agreeing to in its January 16 letter. If it is indeed backtracking on its earlier proposal to say have customer education costs be covered by all ratepayers, including non-participants or those customers that don't opt in, if it is indeed walking all that back, then perhaps Mr. Gallagher is correct. But it's not clear to us exactly what is intended to be covered in this letter.
It'd probably be difficult to ferret out and tease out in a prudency review in a rate case or a review of the program itself. It just will get buried in the minutia, I suspect. But okay, thank you, Mr. Lapp. I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here today and making an appearance. We don't get to see the People's Council himself very often, so appreciated. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. But I will tell you, I think OPC makes a pretty compelling case, and I do have some concerns at this point. I've been convinced by other questions and my own questions that maybe we ought to slow this train down a little bit.
Thank you. I have some questions for NiSource and then the People's Council. For NiSource, for Columbia Gas, is this a NiSource company-wide program?
It is being rolled out across various NiSource companies. I don't think all of them. I don't think Ohio has it.
Are they pending in other states right now?
Yeah, there's pending in Virginia. I think it's being developed for Kentucky. It has been approved in Indiana, and it's pending in Pennsylvania.
NiSource, as a parent corporation, do they purchase offsets generally on the market for the company itself?
Being told no.
Offsets seem to be all the rage lately. I know Disney, Delta Airlines, many corporations, being good corporate citizens, purchase offsets, and now offsets are being marketed towards individuals. And I think there is some requisite background or education that is required as people begin to figure out what is an offset, what is it offsetting, and how does it benefit the environment at large. Sir, I'm sorry, you did not make an appearance for the record, and if you could, I'd appreciate that.
I'm sorry, Eric Evans, Director of Strategy and Risk Integration for NiSource.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. You said a moment ago in response to Commissioner Bubar that the credit from the offset is going to Maryland. What did you mean by that?
It would go to it'll be retired in Maryland's, Columbia Gas of Maryland's name. And then if customers would need proof themselves, we could further subdivide those attributes into a specific customer's name if they need those. But through that MRET system, everything would be retired in Columbia Gas of Maryland's name.
But you're not making any statement or promise that this offset program is designed to benefit the policies of the state of Maryland.
No, we're not at this time.
People's Council made in its statement. Let me ask you about the 95 to 5% ratio. Can you give us some background as to why even bother throwing in the RNG at that point?
Yeah, when we started developing this, we initially wanted to do a lot more around RNG. The drawback is RNG is very expensive. It's somewhere between $20 to $45 a decatherm. So as we started looking at it and trying to see what we could do, it was going to become cost prohibitive to offer that to customers. So that's why we started, let's combine it with carbon offsets. And we were trying to play around, what's the right amount? And at 5%, 95%, it got the price to where we thought it'd be attractive to customers. Ideally, we would love to keep expanding it where it's become more and more RNG and less reliant on carbon offsets. But until prices change, we just don't think we can do that to make it attractive.
All right, so it was just a blend to keep the cost within a particular bandwidth.
Yep, that's it.
In the buck sheet that Dr. Coates prepared for us, she made an assumption that 125 customers would be on the Green Path Rider program. And if all those customers were allocated the development costs over 5 years, they'd be paying, instead of going from 7 cents in year one, it'd be $5.17. Do you recall that?
Mm-hmm.
Following up from Commissioner O'Donnell's questioning, the first year upfront cost would be about $24,000. Is that just for Columbia Gas?
That's just for Columbia Gas of Maryland's piece of that, yeah.
And is this so this is not a shared cost with other NiSource companies? This is Columbia Gas's share?
It is. So, excuse me, the total cost to do all the IT programming is $800-some-thousand. And Maryland's cost is just a piece of that. It became more cost effective to do it that way rather than do the programming separately for each state.
So it's the same program amongst all the gas utilities?
It is the same program, yes.
So Maryland shares $24,000 out of $800,000. And then there's an additional $2,900 per year just for maintaining that structure?
The 2,900 is our projected education expenses, the cost of sending newsletters and material out to customers to explain this program, as well as educate them about RNG and carbon offsets.
And this would be dedicated newsletters or bill inserts?
Yes, I don't think we're going to do bill inserts, but it's mainly newsletters, and maybe some social media is what we're looking at. More cost effective than doing bill inserts.
In Dr. Coates' buck sheet, she stated that, of course, that the utility itself, shareholders could front these costs if they wished. Has there been any discussion of that in the company? These aren't very significant costs.
They're not. They get more significant as we add them up across all of NiSource. So trying to take a uniform approach is why we haven't looked at just the shareholders covering that.
Tell us more about the survey and the need and yearning of your customers to have an offset program available. Because this commission recognizes, and we've approved other green type products for utilities, including SMECO, not too long ago. Of course, we have dozens, hundreds of retail electric and gas suppliers that offer customers a 50% green option, 100% green option. Tell us about the customers in your service territory and how you've decided that this is a program that they would be interested in.
Yeah, so this kind of grew out of it. A couple years ago, we started looking at more into RNG, and we did one survey of customers, and that showed that I think it's 87, 88% of customers, pretty much across all states, but in Maryland, were interested in renewable energy. And that led us to start looking into this more and more. We did another survey that returned basically the same results, that customers are interested in it, but they didn't know much about RNG. And we explained RNG in the survey it's our customer, and so it's a group of customers who've agreed to respond to monthly surveys like this. We explained what RNG was, and a number of them are interested. A good percentage is interested in RNG, and then we asked if they're interested in paying for it, and it's lower percentage interested in paying for it. But so those surveys showed that there's interest around renewable energy, around RNG, at least to that group. We also purchased some information from another third party, from Experian, who can provide customer data, and they segregate our customers into different groups. Those that think green or behave green or true browns, they call it, these different categories. And that showed that roughly 25% of Maryland's customers think and act with the environment in mind. So that has kind of led us to believe that there's a good chunk of our customers who are interested in reducing their natural gas related emissions.
That's obviously good to hear, as more of your customers, more citizens in Maryland are aware of their effects, the impacts, their contributions to emissions and global warming. So I give a lot of credit to Columbia Gas and NiSource for coming up with an innovative proposal such as this Green Path Rider program. Turning to Office of People's Counsel, reading through your statement, Office of People's Counsel made some accusations, I would say accusations here, that the utility is potentially likely deceiving customers into paying for emissions reductions that will not occur, that greenwashing is potentially occurring in this proposal, and that this proposal is potentially misleading to customers who are concerned about the environment. So that theme ran throughout the pleading People's Counsel filed, and those are substantial charges. And if Office of People's Counsel could respond to those assertions.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. I would turn your attention to the revised sheet 114, which is the Green Path Rider. And in there, under availability, It describes the option as the customer selecting the 100% net zero option or 50% emissions reduction option. In there, under character of service, it says that this is available for customers who want to reduce their carbon footprint and would like the option of decarbonizing some or all of the emissions related to their natural gas consumption. And again, in there, it refers to net zero. They're not getting net zero. Even under the best of circumstances, they aren't getting net zero. So we think that's misleading. And I'll tell you 3 reasons why. One is because the carbon offsets that we have documented in the affidavit, and there are numerous problems with carbon offsets. And you don't have to take our word for it. Staff agrees that even with the, quote, most respected offset programs, end quote, that, quote, buyers of offsets would be advised to recognize that they may be receiving less carbon offset than is being reported. That's the first reason why it's not net zero, it's not 100%. The second reason...
Well, it's a maybe not.
Okay, maybe, but there's a lot out there about problems with these registries. And, if it's tree planting, the trees have to be in the ground for 100 years. And that's a hard thing to promise and to keep. But the second reason it's misleading is because Columbia's calculation of the customer's contribution in terms of greenhouse gas emissions disregards methane and disregards fugitive emissions that occur on its distribution system and in its home. Columbia's response to RDR 1-3031 says that Columbia tracks, calculates, and reports methane emissions, but that fugitive methane emissions are not included in the calculation of GPR customers' greenhouse gas emissions because customers' emissions are scope 3, not scope 1 emissions from the company's perspective. That's from the company's perspective. That's Columbia's words. From the customer's perspective, a customer wants to know, what are my greenhouse gas contributions? They include methane, they include fugitive methane. That's something that Columbia tracks. It has information on, at least on some of it, but it's not included. So it's not net zero, it's not 100%. The third reason is that all RNG is not the same. Some RNG is not carbon negative, some actually emits carbon. And Columbia is not proposing to disaggregate and inform consumers as to what RNG is being provided. So those are 3 reasons why we think it's misleading.
Mr. Lapp, did OPC work with the utility on this tariff language?
We had discussions, when it was filed as part of the rate case. I would have to defer to Mr. Sammartino I don't want to mischaracterize our back and forth with Columbia on it.
And just to be clear, I don't want to hear any settlement discussions unless Columbia Gas agrees to share them. Mr. Lapp, your concern is with some of the terminology. Net zero doesn't necessarily mean zero. So my question is, in terms of working with the utility, is there any proposal that you could come to agreement with, let's say if they strike the terminology net zero?
I want to get to that, and I want to amplify a little bit more from our comments yesterday. If I could just first just finish up the last thought.
Sure.
And that is that this isn't OPC being alarmist about this. Staff agrees, and staff says at page 3, that if the offsets do not live up to their claims, the GPR could, in fact, be misleading. Those are staff's words. So it's not just OPC saying that this is misleading. So let me address your question, the question you just made, Mr. Chair. And I want to I want to amplify on some of our comments, the early part of our comments where we talked about how this is not an appropriate business for the Columbia to be in, and for a utility to be providing to its customers through a tariff.
And explain that, because we've allowed that before. I referenced the SMECO Green Rider program that's been approved by this commission.
Without necessarily agreeing that SMECO is right or wrong, I would say that SMECO's offering was for a REC-related product. RECs
Correct.
are in the Public Utilities article. They are part of Maryland policy. Not carbon offsets, which I'll focus on here, but much of what I'll say applies to the RNG attributes as well. But none of that is in Maryland law. And it's interesting that when staff, and I'm going to go a little bit further than our comments did in talking about the authority the commission has to authorize this. And
Well, are you saying we don't have the authority to offer?
I want, that's the question I want to get to.
Okay, if you could get to that
yes.
and be succinct, because I have additional questions.
I will. We don't think the commission has authority to do this. And I apologize because our comments, I think our written comments could have been more clear on this. The staff's comments are interesting because they point to the language in the Public Utilities article that requires the commission to consider, and they quote it this way, protection of the global climate from continued short and long-term warming based on the best available scientific information. That is part of the statute. But the phrase that prefaces all that is in supervising and regulating public service companies. And so the commission doesn't have general authority to address global climate issues. It has that authority with respect to regulating and supervising public service companies. Public service company is defined in the PUA in section 1-101M, or it's actually, I forget, I don't have the letter here, but it's
We know
defined
the-
as
we
a
know the
gas
definition.
company. So
Yes.
it's defined as a gas company, and a gas company is defined, and it means a public service company that is authorized to install or maintain facilities in, over, or under streets for furnishing or distributing gas, or owns a gas plant and transmits, sells, supplies, or distributes artificial or natural gas, or manufactures gas for distribution for sale. A gas plant means material, equipment, and property owned by a gas company and used or to be used for in connection with gas service. Now, Columbia says that participating customers will not notice any change in their service. The GPR would merely provide an avenue for customers to reduce their carbon footprints. Staff says the GPR is an optional program that is not required for the procurement or delivery of natural gas. Also, it does not contribute to reaching Maryland's statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. So this is a product or a service that has nothing to do with the utility's responsibility of providing gas service to customers. This could be widgets. Yes, gas service contributes to climate change, but that doesn't mean that the company can come in and just anything related to climate change and throw it in a tariff. There has to be a connection to the gas utility's performance. The gas isn't going to change at all. Columbia's procurement, its delivery, none of that is going to change. Nothing changes about gas service in Maryland. And so how is it that the Public Service Commission has authority to put a product or service, whatever you want to call it, onto a rider that doesn't have anything to do with providing gas service in Maryland?
Thank you.
It could be widgets.
Thank you. If that is your threshold argument, it was lacking in the OPC pleading. Mr. Gallagher, would you like to respond to the statement from People's Counsel that the commission has no authority to even entertain this proposal?
Mr. Chairman, obviously, as a general response, I'd have to say I disagree, but I'm kind of at a disadvantage here because I didn't see these arguments in the written comments, and I haven't had a chance to research this and provide a comprehensive analysis of it. But if the Office of People's Counsel would prefer that Columbia Gas of Maryland just offer this because it's not required to get commission authority, maybe we can do that.
Mr. Lapp, is that your position, that the utility could offer it to its customers without PSC approval?
Well, I think that the, if the public utility came in and said, we want to offer, financial services and operate as a bank, we would say that's a competitive service and that does not belong within the public utility. So no, I don't agree that Columbia could just come in and offer any service. I mean, it could offer lawn mowing services. We would say, no, it shouldn't offer lawn mowing services, even if they're green.
This was obviously part of the proposal that was filed last year with respect to the rate case. And again, I don't want to get into any settlement discussions, but I could assume that this was stripped out because the parties had some type of disagreement, and hence the utility filed this on a standalone basis. I'll have some more questions. I know, Dr. Coates, you haven't been brought into the discussion yet, but I think that's because your buck sheet speaks for itself. I'll turn to my colleagues. Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of the questions, I think, areas have been covered, but maybe if I ask the company first, I think one of the points made by Office of People's Counsel that I found quite compelling and concerning is the possible negative impacts of a program such as this, the Green Rider. Green Path Rider could have on achieving Maryland's greenhouse gas reduction goals, and that is because it would actually be incentive for people not to take action, to do things that are specifically aimed at reducing their goals, the state goals. Could you respond to that? And then I also would like to know, I mean, did the company consider a product that they could offer that would actually address fugitive methane gas in your system, looking at places, I mean, you serve a very rural part of the state where there could be offsets created specifically in Maryland, or at least the surrounding forested areas, and also RNG injected directly into the system. I mean, is that something the company considered? So that's a kind of two-part question. One, the negative impacts of doing something along the lines you proposed, and is the company willing to consider doing something affirmative for the state of Maryland and our goals?
Okay, at the outset, I would note that I think we've conceded that the program itself is not designed to address the Maryland requirements, but that this is an initial step where we're trying to gauge where we can go from here. But beyond that, I think the questions that can you address some of the...
Yeah, and to be clear, I heard you say this isn't, but I think the concern raised is that this will actually have a negative impact on Maryland. So in effect, it does cause some concern about our programs.
Yeah, and I think we just agree that it would cause a negative impact. I mean, the whole idea, I mean, customers would opt into this. They're willing to pay an extra dollar amount to do this. So they're obviously concerned about the environment. Someone who's willing to spend money because they're concerned about the environment isn't going to then just decide to do nothing. They're going to be looking at other things. So it's not logical to me that this would encourage bad behavior or someone to start using more gas and going in the opposite direction. Because why would they be willing to spend money if they truly don't care about their emissions?
But they're spending this money, but what are they doing to actually reduce their gas consumption by participating in this program, or promoting and using RNG, or again, trying to address concerns about the methane?
Yeah, and well, I think one, logically, if this is going to increase their bill, that would drive them to reduce already, to try to find ways to cut back on their usage, to lower their bill again. That's just, normal economics, supply and demand. I mean, people, that would cause something there. And it's also going to show interest. And if they're interested in this, then we can start looking at other things. And let me jump to your other question about, we did look at the possibility of direct RNG connection into our system and developing that. And, looking at that, it was going to cost about $40 million a year, to do that, to have RNG developed here in Maryland, directly connected into our system to supply our customers. And that seemed like a pretty big leap to ask for a $40 million recovery to do RNG when we wanted to start with this step first. If this program shows customers truly are interested, I'd love to come back and talk to you about how we can develop RNG and deliver that to our customers and expand this and really, attack it that way.
Okay, well, thank you. And I do appreciate the company looking and thinking creatively about how we can address climate change, so I don't want to sound like I'm completely just dumping on the company. But let me ask OPC. Just listening, I'd be interested to hear a response to their, their response to your concern about the negative impacts on Maryland program. But I also wanted to ask, I guess, overall harm. We look at the proposal by staff. They have a number of conditions that are geared toward making sure all customers are informed, the program is transparent, that the costs are contained within the program. So it seems like there are a lot of things offered by staff that mitigate some of the problems that you've raised. And then also just there's always the idea of customer beware, and what is the harm? I mean, just looking at a number of websites, I was kind of interested to know where, and this may be for you, Ms. Napoleon, where the environmental community is, and it seemed like there are, from the United Nations to groups like NRDC, a general support for the concept of people taking action, and this raises awareness. So I guess maybe what is the harm of offering something to Maryland customers so that they can, again, participate, at least in a global sense, reduction of greenhouse gases?
First, I would say, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Napoleon here in a second, but the issue, I think one of the primary things that Columbia is doing here is competing against other options, and the other option being electrification primarily. And so if a customer believes that it's 100% covering, I can turn on my gas stove and my gas furnace, and I can do what I want because 100% of it is going to be mitigated, which again, as I indicated earlier, is not the case, even under the best of circumstances. Then that customer is not going to reduce consumption. Maybe a few customers would reduce consumption because they're paying more, but these are customers that are willing to pay more. And the question is whether other options, a customer who thinks, well, I want to keep my gas furnace and I'm offsetting all my carbon emissions, so I don't need to think further about it. I don't need to think about other options. This is competition between gas and electric. We know that the General Assembly has spoken and said that electrification is the path forward for residential customers. So this is really about changing the customer's mentality to say, I'm doing what I can and I'm offsetting all my emissions, so I'm okay. And over the long term, that increases emissions, and I'll let Ms. Napoleon probably even over the short term. I want to, before turning it over to her, I want to address the disclosures. We don't know. We have a long staff report about what disclosures are important. There's language in there about the staff discusses about it not meeting the building energy performance standards, and that should be a disclosure. There is language about the independent audit, but we don't know any of the details of any of that. And that's one of the reasons why, if you don't just deny this today, we think you need to have an evidentiary hearing. What should those disclosures say? What should be part of that independent audit? And just on the customer beware point, I think we need to make sure that we're seeing the full picture, and that is, this is a regulated public utility. So when it goes out and it says we're making this other offering, there's a sense of, wow, this has been approved by the government, so it must be right. They must really be getting to net zero, or the utility wouldn't be telling that, because I know that this is a utility. It's a public utility. It's regulated by the Public Service Commission. It has the stamp of approval of the state. Whereas other competitive market, there may be a little more, customer beware. You got to be a little careful about what you're getting. But this is the public utility that is showing up in people's homes every day. Let me turn it over to Ms. Napoleon.
Ms. Napoleon, if you could answer the commissioner's question directly. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Alice Napoleon. I'm from Synapse Energy Economics, and I'm here representing OPC today. And I actually agree with everything that David said. I would add as well that the science, the consumer science on decision making is still somewhat nascent, but we do have quite a bit of literature in other areas that aren't specific to environmental critically products. We have that show moral licensing being an issue for customers, that giving them moral license, as I believe that the Green Path writer would, might encourage some customers to increase consumption or defer actions to reduce their consumption of gas, or defer or not at all electrify their end uses of gas.
Okay. So these corporations that are engaging in purchasing offsets, and some of the actions recently by United Nations Council I guess I've interpreted that meaning that there is some legitimacy to these carbon offsets. And then it appears that, again, even a few of I didn't do extensive research, but just was Googling, groups like NRDC. They seem to be generally favorable toward this. So help me with this dilemma of, what's the right environmental action to take here?
I think that there are reasons to be cautious about offsets, and my familiarity with these other positions, I can't speak to them specifically, but my understanding is that generally the position has been for those end uses of gas that are really difficult to electrify or reduce, those might be appropriate for use of offsets. That is a very limited area. That is not those end uses. We're talking about things like medium and heavy duty trucks. We're talking about feedstocks for other processes, things like that. We are not talking about residential end uses to heat homes or heat water, etc.
Right. Well, thank you to all the parties for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think at this point I'm probably in the camp of wanting to maybe just slow down just a little bit to have further consideration before I would be willing to vote in favor of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton.
So, sorry. You said thank you. For me.
Thank you,
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Linton.
Okay. Good.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I just had a couple of questions. My colleagues have actually asked and had answered several of the questions that I had. I was going to start with the first question that Commissioner Bubar asked, which was why now for this particular project. It sounds as though it's just more of a company-wide project as opposed to one that's being offered specifically by Columbia. But I'll start with the People's Council And I was specifically interested in comments or a portion of the argument on page 8, which is, you started in paragraph or section 3, referencing the ability of consumers to acquire carbon offsets through other means or other marketers. So I tried to follow this through the affidavit, and I also looked through following the footnote through the affidavit. But I didn't see any reference to the marketers that would be active in Columbia service territory. So are there, in fact, other opportunities for customers to acquire carbon offsets in Columbia's service territory now?
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. Yes, anyone in any territory could go and buy offsets. All you need to do is go online, and you could obtain, provide your credit card and obtain offsets yourself.
And according to your affidavit, it would be from the same organizations or companies that Columbia wants to use?
Yes, you could get from the same organizations. Or, I'm sorry, credits from the same registries.
Okay, so then to Columbia Gas, do you know, since you conducted a survey looking to see if customers were interested in this program, did you receive any information from customers that, well, I'm interested, yes, but I already do this? Or were they telling you that there's nothing available and they're not active?
Yeah, no one told us that nothing was available, but also no one said that they're already doing this either. And I'll admit, we didn't really ask those types of questions, but the responses we got, showed us that customers need more information. Like, they were not familiar with renewable natural gas. They knew the term renewable energy, but they don't know the details. So, yeah, we didn't ask those specific questions to drill into. Is anyone buying it themselves? Or do they know they can go to these websites? We didn't ask those, so I can't answer that specifically.
Okay.
If I could interject
Sure.
from that, with respect to the competitive issue and the stamp of approval by the commission on this, I think it's noteworthy that this is revenue neutral for Columbia Gas of Maryland. We're not making any money off of this, so to the extent that we are getting involved in the marketplace, if we're not making any money, isn't that a benefit to the customers who get an alternative that doesn't involve a markup for profit? And if there's marketers in the marketplace who want to compete with that, then they can compete with that.
Okay. So regarding some of the costs that this program will require to be covered, and I noticed that apparently you've adopted or agreed with the recommendations the staff has made. So at least as it stands now, all of the costs for the program are borne by customers who participate in it. Is that the proposal?
That's correct, yes.
So it's an awkward thing for me. I can recall a time when, well, let me ask a different way. Currently, there isn't a competitive market for competitive gas in Columbia service territory. Are you familiar with the history as to why that's the case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Part of the reason why was that Columbia was concerned about the cost of operating that competitive market and how those costs would be borne by the customers that participated in it, as well as for the company. And it was easily 6 times as many customers, well, a little under 1,000. But one of the arguments that was being made back then by Columbia, and at the time endorsed by a different People's Council, was that because there were so few customers, it didn't make sense for Columbia to continue participating. And even when other companies offered to pay for the costs, Columbia was still opposed to it. So I guess that's why it brings me full circle back to the original question I had, which is why this program now, when I see a lot of similar situations for costs applied to the company's customers, revenue neutral for the company, no other offers really available, but it seems like this is okay, but the other projects from well over a decade ago, which over time might have developed the kinds of solutions that you're looking to offer now. Why it's not wasn't okay then, but okay today.
Yeah, and I guess, one comparison between then and now, back, 11 years ago when we were looking at the choice program, we also did customer surveys at that time. And the surveys came back that customers weren't even aware they had signed up with marketers. They didn't understand it. They weren't interested. So again, at that point, we were trying to follow. There were certainly costs, but also what the customers were telling us that they wanted. We're trying to do the same thing here. Our customers are saying they're interested in renewable energy. They're interested in the utility offering things. So we're trying to come up with a start, like I said, something that's hopefully not cost prohibitive for them to start, and again, try to grow from there. So I think that's the biggest difference. Customers seem to want this, at least what we're hearing.
If I could please interject on that. Back in the customer choice issue from 11 years ago, we've heard here today that Columbia's programming costs are like $2,400 out of $800,000. Back then, all of the programming costs, and I forget what they were, but they were lots. All of the programming costs were going to be borne by Columbia Gas of Maryland to be passed along to its customers, and that made it extremely cost prohibitive, and no customers would likely be interested in paying for a service like that. And I think that back then, Chairman Nazarian characterized that as throwing money down a rat hole, and I don't think that's the situation here.
Okay. All right. Sure.
Yes, thank you. If I could just respond to a couple points. First, the survey that is being heavily relied upon had 23 respondents. This is not a major survey. It's also apparently, from what we hear, it's people who have volunteered to be part of surveys. So that's not necessarily a representative population. And even with that, of the 23 people surveyed, 15 said no to the question, would you be willing to pay more each month to get your energy from renewable energy sources? 15 said no, they would not. So there's not a lot of support in the survey results for this program. I wanted to just touch one other point, the point about this being revenue neutral and the company not making any money off of it. And this is not necessarily about making additional money. This is about retaining customers with the gas system who might otherwise, who are environmentally conscious, who understand that natural gas contributes to climate change, and that are looking for ways to address that. And by providing these offsets, they're going to potentially stay on the gas system instead of buying an efficient, cost-effective electric source heat pump or otherwise electrifying. So this isn't necessarily about bringing in more customers, or it's about retaining customers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. This is really fascinating. When I read the staff's book sheet, I was all on board with what the staff recommended, and then I read OPC's filing, and it was like, wow, these are some pretty compelling arguments. And so this has been extremely helpful, and I applaud the company for doing what you're doing to try to raise the awareness, be responsive to those customers who maybe already have drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But so this is tough. But I have a question, follow-up question for OPC. Mr. Lapp, in the filing, it talks about, and you've talked about, allowing a monopoly utility to enter the carbon offset market may limit the market's development to the detriment of consumers. So the argument that they're kind of being in the competitive market for carbon offsets, but the arguments you're making this morning were more like, well, no, it's really electricity versus gas, that this is what the choice is coming down to. But that's not really the flavor of what was in OPC's filing. So I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity from you in terms of, is this really being competitive with the carbon offset market, or is this really more about the arguments you're making that, it's going to keep people on gas?
It's definitely both. Carbon offsets can be used by anybody, but in this case, we're talking about a public utility using them. If the state, as a matter of policy, wanted to encourage carbon offsets, the General Assembly could say, okay, we want the Public Service Commission to encourage carbon offsets. How would it do that? Maybe it would have the commission issue an RFP, so the commission can set standards for what the carbon offsets look like. And maybe those standards would be more stringent than what Columbia is proposing. And so there's a lot of quality issues. If you've looked online and read our comments, you can see there's a lot of quality issues like, are these real? Are they additional? Are they verifiable? Are they enforceable? There's those issues. And so and what Columbia's customers are getting, they're getting one package and one offering. But if it would be procured by an individual, I can go and I can say, I want to, there was a Post article a week or two ago about, extracting carbon from the air and keeping it underground for 1,000 years. Those carbon offsets cost huge amounts of money because, I think, I don't know, I don't want to endorse those or anything, but they may be more real. So there's some are more real than others, and customers aren't getting that option. But the other thing that the General Assembly would say, and this is why this is a very big policy decision that the commission is making here if it were to allow it. The General Assembly would probably say, well, for carbon offsets to count, they have to count for the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals, and these won't. And we know that. And that's what the policy of the state would be. It would say, okay, if we're going to do these, we want them to meet these requirements, and we want them to contribute to Maryland's greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it does seem like the decision that I have to make is making a little bit of incremental progress in raising awareness and helping people feel as if they're making a difference versus all of the trade-offs that you've raised. So thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up with the company. In the electric side of the regulated utility world in Maryland, there's some confusion with regard to third-party suppliers and what people are buying into. And we see evidence of that every time we get a cold weather event or a spike in commodity prices and people are on variable rate. We see that evidence, right? It's because the sophistication level isn't necessarily out there when people purchase these products. So my first question to you in follow-up is, how do you guard against that in your proposal? I know you're talking, and I want to hear about your education program because you already mentioned that, but how do you guard against, in a realistic way, people thinking that they're reducing their emissions when they're not? Because average person's going to think, hey, I'm reducing my emissions. Heck yeah, I'll pay more. But they're paying more, but they're not reducing their emissions.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to, is climate change a Maryland issue or is it a national issue? If these offsets and attributes we're buying are happening somewhere in the United States, carbon is being reduced. Maybe not here within the state, but it's happening somewhere. So those customers are paying for that and helping reduce carbon somewhere in the United States. So, and we would make that clear. I know you want to hear me talk about education. We make that point clear to customers.
Okay, fair enough. But you're before the Maryland Public Service Commission. And our charge is to make sure that our decisions are in the public interest.
Right.
So our customers in Maryland are going to pay more for a benefit they may not receive, and that doesn't help the state achieve its environmental goals. Tell me why you think that's in Maryland's public interest. Because you're not before Congress, you're not before FERC, you're before Maryland.
Yeah, I think because it's a step in the direction.
Yeah. There are other outlets for that step, right? Doesn't have to be you as a regulated utility.
Sure, there are other options. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's commended the company for trying to make some incremental step here, and I guess I understand that, but I'd like to see you make a step towards helping us achieve our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals in this state. We got 2 more items on the agenda that's not going to help us reach our greenhouse gas reduction goals sooner, and this isn't either. And I don't know why. It's hard for me. I'm becoming solidified that this is not in the public interest. So maybe there's a downstream process that could convince me of that, but today I'm not convinced. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the commissioners before I call a motion? Seeing none. I would move that we accept the Columbia Gas of Maryland's proposed tariff revisions for filing as modified by staff in its comments dated January 11th, 2023. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
I do not support that.
Commissioner Linton.
I vote no.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
No.
And Commissioner Richard.
No.
As I noted before I cast my vote, I do appreciate our utilities thinking of ways to help consumers in this changing environment to better understand how to reduce their own emissions. I believe we are facing a climate catastrophe if we remain on our present trajectory and course. Taking small steps in the right direction is one way to get that into the general consciousness of the public. Here we have a utility program that will be paid for entirely by customers who wish to participate. There will be no subsidy from other customers. And I do not agree with the worst case scenario positions pointed by Office of People's Counsel, stating that customers, because they're offsetting, may feel that they could use even more gas or create additional emissions. I don't think those customers who are willing to pay a premium on that product would go ahead and take advantage of that. Perhaps a few, yes, but not the overwhelming majority. Further, I do strongly disagree with Office of People's Counsel with respect to the argument that this commission has no jurisdiction over this offering, this voluntary offering of a public service company, a gas company. In this case, the commission has very broad jurisdictions, and even more so recently with respect to environmental matters involving its utilities. I vote aye. The motion fails by a vote of 4-1. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item number 9 is a request from Altus Power, Inc. and Wakefield Solar Energy Center, LLC for a waiver of the operational deadline to begin commercial operations for the Wakefield Solar Energy Project.
Hello, Mr. Dean.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Dean on behalf of staff. Item 5 is a filing by Altus Power Incorporated and Wakefield Solar Energy Center, LLC, requesting waiver of the regulation regarding the operational deadline for the Wakefield Solar Energy Center, a 0.495 megawatt solar energy facility participating in the Maryland Community Solar Pilot Program, intended to be constructed near the town of New Windsor in Carroll County. Under the Community Solar Regulations of COMAR 20.62.03.04 C2, a proposed solar energy project that fails to begin operation within 36 months of its application must be removed from the electric company's pilot program queue. The only exceptions to removal listed in the regulations at 0.04C3 are the failure of the electric company to allow a completed project to interconnect and operate, or a pending legal challenge to the project. The regulations at 2062-01-04 also provide that the Commission may waive a community solar regulation for good cause shown. As detailed in the filing and in the timeline in the attachment to the filing, the applicants have been reasonable and consistent at working towards completion of the project. However, certain local regulatory approvals and issues with the procurement of certain project components, such as the transformer and switchgear, have delayed the construction and operation of the project. The filing states that the necessary regulatory approvals are anticipated to be completed by June or July 2023, and that the applicants have determined that an adjusted operational deadline of March 17, 2024 would allow sufficient time to complete all the permitting and the construction of the project. Consistent with state policy regarding this program, staff concludes that the project meets the requirements for the grant of a waiver of the operational deadline from Comar 20.62.03.04C for good cause shown, and recommends that the commission grant the waiver requested by the applicants and extend the operational deadline for the Wakefield Solar Energy Project to March 17, 2024.
Thank you for your recommendation, Mr. Dean. Counsel for Altus and Wakefield.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Max Cook on behalf of Altus Power, Inc. and Wakefield Solar Energy Center, LLC. I also have with me Mr. Kevin O'Neill, the development manager for the project. We've reviewed staff's filing and have nothing further to add. Thank you for your consideration, and with that, we're here to answer any questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Questions from Commissioners. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I wanted to ask staff, Mr. Dean, you said that this helps the state meet its policy goals, is consistent with state policy goals. Don't these continued string of waivers take us further and further away on a continuous basis, because we're almost in a rubber stamp mode now for these waivers, further away from meeting our policy goals in the state? I need you to speak for staff generally, because in my opinion they do, and you know that, and I have a long history of believing that. We're not completing these projects.
It is true we're not completing these projects. However, the regulations,
They say we may grant a waiver, not we must,
well,
but we haven't turned any down.
that is true, Commissioner. And in the past, the commission has found that granting the waivers and allowing the continuation of the projects that have applied for and been approved for inclusion in the pilot were consistent with the General Assembly's policy as stated in the statute.
I can assure you, sir, that the General Assembly didn't intend for these projects to be delayed indefinitely by waiver upon waiver upon waiver upon waiver. They did not. And I think staff needs to refigure that in, because they did not. That's not what the intention of the General Assembly was, I can assure you of that. They want this stuff done, and we hear it from our colleagues in the General Assembly all the time. We're not helping meet the goals.
That is true, Commissioner. I note that, for example, some of the counties may not have adopted the state policy of promoting and trying to quickly approve authorizations.
Well, maybe
They may see that their requirements are necessary and need to be met, and that a full review is necessary before approving the projects.
Well, we have preemptive authority over local jurisdiction generally, so we don't subordinate ourselves to the locals in their delays and obfuscations.
Yes, Commissioner, but that's only for the grant of CPCNs. We don't have that over these which do not have CPCN.
Maybe if we didn't grant one of these waivers and maybe a project fails, maybe there'll be some incentive in the community to quit bringing this stuff before us and get a fire lit and get this stuff done. What does staff have to say about that?
You're asking staff, does not regulate.
Well, I know, but staff's recommending on a continuous basis that we approve this stuff. And I'm going to vote no on both of these, Mr. Chairman, because I don't think it's in the public interest either. Thank you, Mr. Dean. I appreciate it.
Additional questions? Commissioner Bubar.
Yeah, I just have one question, I guess, for staff. Can you just give a perspective on tools or maybe questions about leverage? The issues, I think, as Commissioner O'Donnell said, it feels a little like Groundhog Day. I mean, it's similar issues. It's issues with local jurisdictions making decisions or giving approvals of permits, and it's supply chain issues. Some of those feel as if, or those two issues feel as if it's not necessarily in the control of the company to solve those issues. They can certainly influence the local jurisdiction decision-making processes, maybe a little better, but can you just talk a little bit about what does it take to break this cycle such that, it doesn't feel like Groundhog Day where we're just going to continue to get these requests for waivers, and when they come, it's like you don't want to kill the project because the companies behind it, investments have been made, and it's getting there. But it does feel a little frustrating that we don't know how to break the cycle. Just asking for your opinions.
It's a good question. It's very difficult to see exactly what can be done to speed things up. In other filings under other programs, for example, large electric companies are having trouble obtaining transformers and switchgear, which is the same components that they are talking about in regard to the supply chain. If a large electric company is having problems getting those components, a smaller company, I could see that they would have the same problems. And I don't know exactly how the commission itself can make transformers and switchgear available on a more timely basis. That's a national, if not international, concern. So that is some of the things that we can see here. Again, with other issues, we set a 36-month period to build and commence operation, but that deadline may have been set without knowing some of the issues that some county agencies may have with granting permits that are necessary, because these permits are not superseded or waived under the commission's authority to grant a CPCN. So that may be the timeline, and the regulation may be causing some of this without a full consideration of the normal time that it takes to get a full set of permits approved. If that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Seeing no additional questions, I would move that we grant the requested waiver to extend the operational deadline for the Wakefield Solar Project to March 17th, 2024. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
No.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye by a vote of 4-1. The motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, item number 10 is a request from Nautilus U.S. Power Holdco LLC and Lion One LLC for a waiver of the operational deadline to begin commercial operations for the Ridge Road Community Solar Project.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff, U.S. Power Holdco LLC and Lion One are requesting that the Commission waive Comar 20-620304C and extend the operational deadline for completing the Ridge Road Community Solar Project from March 10 2023. Its first deadline to December 31, 2023. The project is being constructed by Lion One LLC, a subscriber organization. The Ridge Road Community Solar Project was awarded capacity in the third year of the Community Solar Pilot Program in the open category and is located in the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company service territory. Applicant is unable to meet its current operational deadline for 3 reasons. First, applicant has not received all required Baltimore County permits and approvals required for building a community solar project. Second, applicant is experiencing extensive supply chain delays. And third, site control negotiations are ongoing. For these reasons, a 9-month extension is being requested. It seems likely that the remaining permits will be granted if the required work is completed. However, supply chain issues and the recent site negotiations with the property owners on whose property this community solar project will be located raise additional issues beyond the applicant's control. Due to these extenuating circumstances, staff recommends that the Commission grant the waiver requested by applicant and extend the operational deadline for the Ridge Road Station from March 10 to December 31, 2023, contingent upon the applicant filing a report with staff regarding the status of this project and its 3 ongoing issues on the 15th of each month, beginning February 15th, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Garofalo. Counsel for the project developer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. David Bugelmans on behalf of Nautilus US Power Holdco LLC and Line 1 LLC. Also up with me from Pivot Energy, the developer for this project, Mr. John Shields and Mr. Bruce Wilson. The only point I'd like to make is a quick clarification with respect to staff's comments today and also their buck sheet. Staff states in its buck sheet that the project is engaged in site control negotiations. If you look at our letter, it's correct that in 2021 the project had to redesign. There was a redesign of the project to address some additional visual screening requested by the landowner, which took about 3 months to resolve. But there's no issue with site control at this point. All of that's resolved. Really, at this point, it's just some remaining local permits and then supply chain issues that are holding this project back. I don't think that materially changes this request, but I wanted to make sure that was reflected on the record today. Other than that, we're here to answer any questions. We appreciate your consideration.
Thank you for the clarification on site control. Everything is okay with the landowner at this point?
Yes, correct.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So what type of risk assessment do these developers and these companies do when they commit to doing this by a date certain, legally binding commitment? And what does the risk assessment entail with regard to what if we can't get owner, supply chain, local government, whoever, all the frozen tundra of Maryland, all the excuses we hear all the time? What risk do you have?
So I think what we could do, Your Honor, is one of the folks from Pivot may be able to talk about their project planning and scheduling and how they look at this. So that's why I was looking back at them.
It seems to me like these continuous string of waivers take all that risk away. You have no risk from beginning to end. We'll just keep extending them
Sure.
for any reason.
Sorry. Good morning, John Shields with Pivot Energy. Yeah, we certainly look at the risks at the onset of the project, even before we engage with the municipalities, even before we submit our application for the pilot program. We use our experience with similar projects, our experience with projects, similar size, similar locations. Certainly, look at the AHJ that we're working in. Some have different regulations and permitting requirements, and some seem to be a smoother path forward, and others a rockier path. So we look at the known risks up front, and we put together a schedule, and we have those our tasks and our scope and our risks in that schedule, and we work through them as they come up. We actually have we have a list of risks, and then many of those risks go away, and we never see them again, and some of those risks actually become true issues. Like in this case, the risk of taking a project through the Carroll County project Baltimore County approvals has become an issue with the timeline that it's taken to get through there. So we know it's a risk. We we try to mitigate those upfront as best we can. We try to put full applications together. We try to, we do. We have as many meetings with staff and try to put the a precursor to our application. So we kind of gather the information that we think that they're going to want to see in that application, and we try to streamline that. But even with our best efforts in that regard, things come out of left field. The county, Baltimore County in this case, does have a prescribed kind of a policy of when they expect to have reviews completed. I think it's something along the lines of a 45-day review period for them for the first iteration, and then 30 days with each iteration after that. And those were on a few occasions with our reviews, those were exceeded. So, we know that's a risk. I don't know how we could have necessarily foreseen that the 45-day was going to be, I think, 129 days in one case. So that's kind of how we deal with that. As far as an associated risk that's come up in this case is with procurement of equipment. I think it's in the application, kind of some rough timelines of when we had, 3 years ago when at the onset of this project, what we would have expected for delivery of that equipment versus where we are now. So full admission, I think that's a risk that we didn't see coming, and we are, part of our mitigation to that is to come to this board and ask for an extension to the pilot program.
It feels like to me, with all due respect, that these continuous string of waivers that Mr. Bugelmans and others bring before us always point the finger somewhere else. Never have I said, we didn't get it in on time, that our timeline was lagging, our work wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be, our negotiations with the county weren't as good as I thought they could have been. We didn't do our part. I've never heard that, not once. It's always someone else. No responsibility for the applicant. And I'm frustrated with that because you're delaying the state meeting its energy goals. You all have a piece of that. And I'm very frustrated.
Additional questions from commissioners? Seeing none, I would move that we grant the requested waiver to extend the operational deadline for the Ridge Road Community Solar Project from March 10th, 2023 to December 31st, 2023, and direct the applicants to report to staff regarding the status of the project on the 15th day of each month, beginning on February 15th, 2023. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Nope.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye on a vote of 4-1. The motion carries.